Hello, everyone. We're going to give people a few minutes here to join. While we do, if you want to just orient yourself here with Demio, there will be a tab for handouts where you can go and download that content. There is also going to be a polls tab. We will have a couple polls throughout the chat or throughout the webinar. And so as we do that, we will signal when to go click over there, and we would love your engagement and participation in that. And then that third tab is going to be the chat. So as we go through this webinar, please feel free to introduce yourself, throw in any comments, stories, questions you might have, and we'll be sure to keep an eye on that chat. So like I said, we'll give it a couple minutes here, maybe another minute for people to join, and then we will get started. All right, loving all these hellos. We have people from all over the place. If anyone is in North Carolina, that is where I'm based. Ooh, North Carolina. Ooh, I see a couple. Okay. I am also near Charlotte.
There you go. I see Melissa from Western Washington. I'm just across the mountains here in Eastern Washington. Welcome.
All right, cool. Look at all these people. All right, Kurt, do we want to give it another like 30 seconds maybe?
Sounds good. Give it another 30 seconds, then we can dive in from there.
Sweet. All right, I think we're probably good to get going here. All right, cool. So I'm going to kick us off. We are so excited to be with you guys here today. We are going to talk about pillars of a successful business continuity program and really how that drives resilience for your organization. If you want to go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So these are just a couple of the things we'll be going through today. This is not in order, but some of the outcomes we're hoping that you all get as we go through this webinar today. Next slide, please. All right, beautiful. So let's do a couple quick intros. My name is Kate O'Malley. I am a senior product manager with Fusion Risk Management. I've been on that team in the product space for the last 3 or 4 years, but prior to that, I was in consulting, working with many organizations like yourselves, in which I was really interacting with a lot of the continuity managers, disaster recovery teams, etc. So very excited to be here with you guys today. And then Kurt.
Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening all. I see we've got folks joining from around the globe, which is awesome. I am Kurt Blomdahl, a principal customer success manager here at Fusion. I've been at Fusion for just over 3 years, working with many of our existing clients, specifically in the insurance and health insurance sector, helping them work through their programs, identify pain points, and work to solve them within the system. Prior to joining Fusion, I spent 5 years at a local health insurance company, Primera Blue Cross, one of the Blue Cross Blue Shield companies, on their business continuity team, and I supported many aspects of the business continuity lifecycle program that we'll talk much about today, as well as other areas of disaster recovery, third-party risk management, and crisis management, and supported both our Fusion system and our ENS system as well. So responsibility from a lifecycle perspective. So very nice to have everyone on today. I saw a couple of comments. Kate mentioned you're from from the North Carolina area. I'm from Eastern Washington State, Yakima, Ellensburg to be specific. So welcome everyone.
Awesome. And so as we go through this presentation, please let us know if you have any questions, stories, comments, etc. in the chat. Whichever one of us is not speaking, we'll be keeping an eye on the chat. We will try to address any really pressing questions throughout the webinar, but we will also have 10 minutes reserved at the very end for any lingering questions. So if you do want to save them for the end, that is fine as well. All right, cool. Well, let's dive right in.
Okay. So as we hop in, Kate and I obviously both from the Fusion team, just a little background on Fusion itself. Fusion is a leading provider in the risk management, operational resilience, and planning software and services space. And we are here dedicated to helping our clients and organizations enhance their operational resilience, business continuity programs, and reduce risk in their organization overall. In general, our goal is to provide a simple, cohesive system through which organizations can effectively identify, assess, and mitigate the risks that come towards us on a daily basis, right? By leveraging analytics or real-time data integrations and reporting capabilities, Fusion empowers businesses to proactively manage disruptions, such as recent hurricanes, etc., ensure compliance with regulatory requirements, and maintain continuous operations in the face of unforeseen events, of which we know they continue quite a bit. We understand that every organization, including you all on the call today, are at a different spot in your journey on the way to resilience. And whether it's through business continuity, disaster recovery, crisis management, third-party risk management, or operational resilience, or other risk and resilience programs, we're here to support you with the tools and insights needed to help manage events and identify risk in your system and work to mitigate that. So with a little overview there, love to dive in as many of our focus today is on the business continuity side of things. First off, I want to lay a foundation, right? Many of you are aware of different aspects of the business continuity lifecycle. And those are the areas that we're going to be focusing on today. So I wanted to take a quick overview on the different areas of business continuity lifecycle. First off, we see the BIA or the business impact analysis, right? This is where we ensure that we have both our baseline data, the organization mapped as a whole, and where we work to define our processes. It's very important to understand how our business runs as we go to recover from a crisis. And to do that, we want to make sure that we define a level of processes off the bat. Once we have those processes defined, we can map what's in the business through different departments, through different organizations, and connecting the different dependencies that are there as well. Next up, we see folks utilizing the system as well as in their organizations performing that impact assessment. So maybe there are different impact assessments from a brand perspective or operational or financial impact assessments for your different processes. These are important because they allow us to say, hey, in a different situation, how is this process going to react? For example, a social media company, right? Social media company is heavily impactful on those users from a brand perspective. And so taking two processes, what is out there on the internet from a process that's supporting that end user experience versus maybe their headquarters cleaning process, those are going to have a different impact, right, from a social media company. And the brand impact that would be available if those end users aren't able to access the system, that would be significant. Next up, we see folks documenting those dependencies, right? So what else is this process dependent on within the business, both other business processes as well as other areas of the system, such as technology, vendors, third parties, sites, and people, etc. Lastly, on the business impact analysis is gathering that criticality. What is the level of criticality of this process? Oftentimes we see folks understanding that, hey, raising their hand and saying, hey, my process is critical, right? Well, if everyone's process is critical, then no one's critical. They're all the same, right? So we want to make sure that we're documenting throughout the business so that we can have a good understanding of what happens in within our organization. Once we've gathered those processes, and especially those critical processes, that's where we're going to start our planning. Business continuity planning is the combination of both those critical areas of the business and the action focused procedures and strategies for when something happens, what they're going to do, right? When your leadership calls and says, hey, what's impacted? Or, hey, what are we doing in this situation? This is what we actually pull out and utilize, right? We identify what's been impacted in the business. Maybe that's an application or a third party, such as something like CrowdStrike has happened. How do we identify what's happened and then act on that? We're gathering different people, we're gathering different teams, we're gathering recovery strategies and actions and procedures at this stage so that when something does happen, we can use that information in an event. Some companies utilize a loss of strategy for their area of the business. Other companies utilize some of those 4R scenarios, response, recovery, etc. But ultimately here, we're trying to think through situations before they happen and plan for them. So we're trying to consider what gaps we might see within the business from a response or recovery perspective, and also considering single points of failure. Everyone knows how their business operates. So if you're a process owner or a plan owner, you know how your business operates on a day-to-day basis. But what about if something bad happens, right? Let's think through that beforehand. And lastly, in this bucket, all of this information we've talked about so far is information that's been documented. It's important to think about making sure that your leadership is aware of that content and also approving that content. So we want to make sure that the leadership signs off on what we have planned for use in an event. Next up, we will look to test or exercise this applied planning information, right? As we've created plans, that's great that we've created it, but how does it actually meet the road, or how does it actually perform when something is happening or when we apply a scenario to that, right? Sometimes folks will do plan walkthroughs or tabletop exercises with one area or maybe multiple areas of the business, or maybe we'll look to a more mature state in performing a full scale or functional exercise with the business. Those are areas that we take what we've already planned and what we've already gathered and using that to apply that to a scenario and see how it works. Oftentimes, there will be successes and things that we're going to celebrate, but other times there's going to be gaps, right? Or issues or findings out of an exercise. That's a good thing, right? As we have findings out of our exercise, that's where we go back to the plan or go back to our documentation in general and update those documents so that we are ready based on those previous lessons learned. That brings us to this last bucket here, right? Which is the actual response to a crisis. This is where we put all of that planning work into motion, all of our assessment and analysis of the business, the planning we've done, testing and exercising. This is where that rubber meets the road. So consider a fire drill for a quick second. If I say the words fire drill, that might mean two things to you. Maybe that means stop, drop, and roll, or maybe that means evacuate the building, right? Similar to how we might test or exercise a plan in a real life incident, that's when we're going to activate the plan, activate those strategies, and activate what we've planned on so that we can respond to that crisis in a manner that we've planned. So if there's a drill happening and there's a fire right next to you, maybe you're on fire, right? You're not going to evacuate first. We're going to stop, drop, and roll. So we're going to know how to respond. So as we've talked through these, Kate, anything to add here as we move on?
No, I think you've covered it.
All righty. Well, I'll go ahead and pop to the next slide and let you take this one here.
All right, awesome. So as we just talked about a little bit about that life cycle, making sure we're all starting from that same foundational knowledge. So now we're going to dive into a little bit about those common challenges that we see when we're driving continuity and resiliency across our organization. So as we go through these, we also wanted to highlight some guiding questions to really get you all thinking. So please note there are questions underneath each one of these problems. We're going to start off here with executive buy-in and organizational buy-in. As we all know, I think getting senior leadership and executives to understand the importance of business continuity can be very challenging. As a BC manager or a program manager, we really need to effectively communicate the potential impacts of our disruptions to the business in order to gain that level of buy-in. And then in gaining that level of buy-in, ideally, we are able to then promote and tie the value of our program to the organization's objectives and ensure that we're given that necessary support, whether it be budget or organizationally, to really bolster that program. This can be really challenging because it is so easy for us to talk at the level at which we operate, thinking about our individual processes, our dependencies, our owners, a lot of those things that Kurt just touched on in the life cycle. When in reality, our organizations or our executives might not always care about some of those lower level items. We'll talk in a little bit about how we address that challenge and how we really bring that up to the executive level. But as you think about your own organization, think about the following. Are your executives bought into your program goals? And more importantly, do these goals align with the executive priorities? So now not only do we need our executives to buy in, but we also need the organization to find value in the work that we do. One of the most common challenges I hear is that our participants are simply not engaged or they are not filling out their BIAs. So it can be incredibly challenging to get our end users or our participants to really begin or complete that work at all, if not effectively. We know that continuity, building a culture of resilience really requires a collective buy-in, which Kurt will speak to in just a minute here. But we also know that our process owners, plan owners, team members, etc., have these day jobs, and the act of performing a BIA or reviewing and improving a BCP might just be a small part of their larger role. So again, as you think about your program participants, consider how you're engaging the organization for participation in these activities. Are you making it easy to understand? Are you making it easy to complete the required activities? How are you enabling your organization to complete and do their part? Are you connecting the role of the participants to your executive or even organizational level objectives to help really sell that value? So as mentioned, we're going to touch on a few more problems and then we'll dive right into the solutions. Kurt, anything to add there?
Sure. I think it's really important to help tell the story within the company that each area of the business is part of the pieces. They're a piece of the puzzle, piece of the broader resilience and risk and resilience puzzle within the organization. And so what they do adds up across the organization. Oftentimes we see, oh, hey, I've already got what I need to do for my area, right? We're siloed. We're only talking about one area of the business. And so it's the difficulty of not seeing that broader picture that many folks struggle with, right? Both executives focused on their organization and what their priorities are, right? But how do we weave in risk and resilience to that broader story?
Absolutely. So then our second one that we have on here is really around siloed programs and the ambiguous program definition. So again, another problem we see in really this line of work is unfortunately around the program itself. So we often see silos existing amongst our organization that make it really challenging for us to succeed in collecting that full view of our business and its critical dependencies. And because continuity and resilience are organization wide, these planning and response activities do require that involvement, input, engagement from all departments across the organization. So again, when we act and operate in silos, we typically see that fragmented view of our organization's risk. And we need to ensure that we're assessing that risk from that same fashion or in that same manner across the organization to be able to understand that overall risk profile for our organization. We also just don't want that duplicative effort. So the more silos we have, the more likely that is to happen. So again, as you think about your own organization, really consider how you are seeking to grow and strengthen those partnerships with other parts of your org. We want to ensure that executive buy-in and that organizational buy-in. And to do so, we also really need to have or reduce those silos, but also have those clear definitions for our roles and our responsibilities. So again, think about your program and to highlight those last couple questions there, am I clearly defining roles and responsibilities across my program participants? And do they understand how their individual contributions drive resiliency for the enterprise? Kurt, anything to add on that one?
I think really hits home when we start to talk about the folks in the business who don't know what their role is, right? You're just asking them to do one task, and it is part of that broader vision. So,
Yeah,
and you're trying
exactly.
to move the whole thing forward. So, very good. All right. I'll go ahead and move us on to the next slide here, which continues this list of common challenges that we see. And then, like Kate mentioned, we'll walk through some of those solutions or ways that we can work around these as well. The first one is on this slide is focused on the resilience-based culture. How is your organization setting the stage for culture from the executive leadership all the way down to your frontline folks or your analysts, things like that, who are providing a culture of resilience? One of my clients is in the property and casualty insurance space. They support some of their business continuity and enterprise risk management programs. And one of their corporate values is resilience. That's impactful, right? That thread is woven throughout the company culture, that resilience is important to that organization. Now, that doesn't automatically mean that resilience is there on a day-to-day basis for business continuity planning and everybody's got their BC plan, right in front of them. But what that does mean is, how is that thread running through the organization? How does your organization utilize policies, procedures, and enterprise governance programs to help share the journey of resilience and those resilience activities that may not be part of your day-to-day job activities, like Kate mentioned? That's also done from an awareness and education standpoint. We often hear the wording that whoever shouts the loudest is the one that's heard, right? So if our program is out there in the forefront of saying, hey, yes, resilience is important, yes, business continuity planning, testing, and exercising is important, that the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? Next up, or Kate, before I move on, anything you wanted to cover, from a resilience culture perspective?
No, I think you covered that. I will call out that I do think a lot of these problems are kind of woven together and directly tied. And so I think, as you start to drive a resilience-based culture, your organization starts to buy in a bit more. So you will hear me probably reference that in a few more places throughout our webinar.
Yeah. Executive management and leadership support of our program directly impacts the culture and vice versa, right? Often the aspects of enterprise culture or the culture of a resilience-based organization are things that don't happen overnight, right? They take weeks, months, even years to help form and mold. But data is something that I feel like is a little bit closer to our fingertips, and it's also very impactful to our programs. We talked about the business impact analysis, doing that BIA at the right level. Well, as we're going out and capturing our dependencies, we often see folks who struggle with gathering those source data system of records. So we see individuals, employees, those applications, those third parties or vendors as some of those data sources that folks and many organizations struggle to have. Oftentimes we have one or more than one or two or five different systems of record that don't talk to each other for those source data areas. That's difficult when we go out to the business and collect a BIA and collect those applications, and some of those applications aren't in our list. That's tough, right? We also talk about making sure that the data that we do gather is a value add. We don't want to just collect data for the sake of collecting data. Let's make sure we're collecting a simple, focused set of data that is actionable, that we will utilize, right? And knowing that this is part of telling the broader story. And this is often where we see technology helping, right? Being able to collect and collate that data in one spot to be able to tell the story in an easy manner. Kate, anything else to add here?
Nope, I think you got it. Simply put, getting the right data in a timely manner is hard.
Yeah.
So we will chat more about that.
Perfect. All right, here we go.
All right, cool. So now it has come time for the first poll. So as mentioned, when you all joined, there should be a tab on my screen. It's to the upper right of my Demio platform, and it'll say poll. We would love to hear from you. As I'm sure you guys have guessed, this poll is a bit of a pulse check. We want to see really what challenges most resonate with you. So again, our options are 1, executive and organizational buy-in, siloed, 2, siloed programs and ambiguous program definitions, 3, our lack of resilience-based culture, 4, the quality and quantity of data, or maybe it's something entirely different. And if that's the case, please select other and drop some additional comments in the chat. I'm seeing that maybe it's more than one, and that is totally fair as well. Maybe you also have challenges around testing and exercising your plans, or maybe it's around your organization and programs struggle with crisis communication. There can be so many different things that we have there. All right, I'm just taking a look here.
Kate, I see there's 2 that are kind of just ahead of the others. We've got quality and quantity of data, and the siloed programs, ambiguous programs, kind of taking the lead there. Though not far behind are the resilience-based culture and executive buy-in. I'm a little surprised to see, but thankful, I suppose, to see executive and organizational buy-in kind of at the back there.
As am I. I will admit I have lots of solutions prepped for that one. So we're still going to talk about it.
Good.
All right, awesome.
I think, a couple comments in the chat as well, all of the above, and wish there could have been, multiple to select there. I think this resonates because a lot of programs don't just have one struggle that's significant. They have multiple struggles that we have to walk through, right? Getting your end users or getting your executives to be bought in. If we focus on that, how do we also focus on data at the same time? That's difficult. But I think Ramya's comment about, hey, there's people that are in my boat, right? We are all in this together, and helping encourage and helping work to grow the journey of resilience in our organizations. And just knowing that you're not alone is impactful, that we all have ways to share with each other. And maybe that's kind of where we'll go next, Kate.
All right. Awesome. Thank you for all of your participation and your comments in the chat. We will continue to look at that.
Okay.
All right. So now let's chat about solutions, suggestions. Oh, I think we went the wrong way there.
Sorry about that. We're back on. Apologies.
Nope, you're good. All good. All right. So let's chat about suggestions to really address those programmatic issues. So as a reminder, we left the executive and organizational buy-in problem with a couple of questions. And the overall essence of those questions was really, does your leadership understand what you do? And more importantly, why you do it? Do they understand the value of your program? So as I briefly alluded to prior, one great way to really do this is to consider how your program goals align with your executive priorities and strategic direction. We want to really identify metrics that are meaningful to your executive leadership team and then consistently report on them. So it becomes almost common nature to expect and understand those various metrics. We really want to think about having regular touch points, for example, with our leadership, making sure that we're not only reporting the status of our organization's resiliency posture, but also discussing those enterprise level risks. So your leadership ultimately wants to know, what are my risks? How do I reduce potential financial loss? How do I uphold the organization's reputation, amongst many other things? But then also, we want that regular cadence with your leadership because you also need that support, both budget and internal organizational support, to be able to keep your program moving forward and doing so in an effective manner. This also gives us really that opportunity to share the state of our readiness, our gaps in process, and even current events potentially impacting the overall company. I'm seeing some comments in the chat here. I'm just going to read through these real quick. Yep, so I see leadership needs to understand the procedural and programmatic risks involved with the risk appetite of the entity. Completely agree with that, and I think that's a fantastic thing to really incorporate into those sessions that you start to have and that regular cadence you have with your leadership. I think another tip I've heard is really consider those events that have happened that have impacted your company in the last 30 days. I very recently, and this hits a little close to home, being that I am in North Carolina, recently had a conversation with someone whose organization was greatly impacted by Hurricane Helene. And they had continuity, crisis plans, all of those things in place, but did not really effectively convey or maybe even have a view of the overall gaps in their program. So what ended up happening is that Hurricane Helene ended up taking out one of their primary vendors that supplied 90% of fluids to their medical clinics. With that vendor no longer available, we now have leadership that is very interested in that continuity, that crisis communication plan, those third parties. We want to understand now, okay, we've lost our main vendor. How do we pivot, respond, and adjust? Because our organization in this case is, run by medical clinics, and we want to make sure that those fluids are provided. So this is just one recent example, again, that hits a little close to home. But I think it's a great example to show, how recent events can really drive and get that additional buy-in and support in finding that value in your program. One more thing I will mention on this one is that I think it's also really important to find a partner. Start with who you know. Does not have to be a manager, a direct manager. In fact, it probably shouldn't be. Probably should be a bit more cross-functional, and take advantage of a senior leader that really values risk and resilience. Oops, sorry, I lost my spot here on my slide. So yeah, we want to make sure that we are really taking advantage of those people. I think this comment actually came from Kurt, but I heard someone once say that a senior leader that values risk and resilience and finding someone to partner with is kind of like finding someone to partner with you and run with you on a cold morning. For me, that would be someone to run with me at all, because I do not like running. But the goal is really, or the notion is that it's tough, but when you have that partner, it often pays off in the future. So we'll speak more about this as we continue to go through, and we'll speak more to obtaining that organizational buy-in as well, as I believe, as I mentioned, it has a lot to do with that company culture. But just keep in mind, people typically look for reasons to celebrate. So continue to demonstrate the value of your efforts, tell stories of your program's successes and what it means for the broader collective. All right, so next we're going to touch on the siloed programs here and ways to address that. One thing that I would really like to harp on, and I think it kind of goes hand in hand with the previous one, is that we want to really build and strengthen those relationships with closely related programs. So not just our executive teams, but also participants across all organizational departments. We want to really reduce those silos by establishing clear communication channels and a unified continuity plan. We want to also clearly define the roles and responsibilities for those key program participants or end users, people like our process owners, our plan owners and approvers, our resilience coordinators. It truly is so much easier to get those BC champions and stakeholders to invest their time and effort if they have a clear understanding of what is expected of them and what is required of them for the program to be successful. And again, we also want to share the impact that those individuals have in really reducing risk across the organization. Again, candidly, people are more likely to buy into the things in which they can have a direct impact. Kurt, do you want to add anything to those two? I know I just spoke a lot.
No, you're good. You're good. Appreciate that. I think, multiple comments in the chat about senior management and executive management buy-in, right? That's a struggle sometimes, but there's often somebody who is going to have a risk or resilience mindset in general. Maybe that's in the legal space, or maybe that's your CISO who's concerned about cybersecurity and all the cybersecurity events we have today. Well, if they're already concerned about cybersecurity or another type of risk or resilience or planning, take advantage of that to expand that scope to the other areas within your company. I think it's very important, and I think a lot of companies don't do this very well, is partnering with other areas in your company. We're all singing the same song. We're all trying to reduce risk and improve resilience at the same time. And it's not a, hey, I'm business continuity, I'm fighting against DR. Now, sometimes we're working with them on a budget perspective. That may be the case, but really that's where 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2. 1 + 1 = 3, right? The sum of all of our programs are working together to, in the end, help the resilience of our company. So appreciate the comments in the chat there. I think there's the scare tactic that sometimes works. There's also the positive partnership tactic, depending on your organization, the style, the culture, right? You might choose to use one of those, or for different people, approach them in a different manner. I think it's difficult when we sometimes always come at it with a, hey, this is what I need approach, right? We have to focus on what are they gaining? What is the organization gaining by doing these things?
I will also add, sorry, I did just see a comment about regulatory requirements. And I think that's another fantastic, I didn't mention it, but it's another fantastic way, I think, to really start getting that buy-in. I know more recently we have, for those in the EU or impacted, we have the DORA regulation coming out in January of next year. That is something that has really put a lot of executives in the room for these types of conversations, because ultimately they care about not getting fined, right, for those regulations and remaining in compliance. And so I think that's a fantastic call out that came from John. So another great way to really get that initial buy-in, I think, and kind of keep that buy-in.
We might have a
Sorry,
little
Kurt, continue
momentum
on.
from, oh, you're good. A little momentum from a regulatory perspective. But what do we do after
Mhm.
that? That might bring visibility, but we've got to have a plan to put that in place.
Exactly.
That's where we have to tell the story of need. Hey, this regulation is out there. We're not prepared. This is the level of risk. Look at all this financial issues or brand issues that we may have if we were to have an event, and maybe tell the story of a competitor to your business or another organization out in the world that has had an impact to their business to something similar. Think of CrowdStrike, and if you were impacted by that, you can tell your own personal story, even though it may hit close to home, right? But if you weren't impacted, then you can point to other organizations who were impacted, saying, "Hey, look what happened to them. We need to plan." And I think also kind of transitioning here to some of those um, resilience-based culture perspectives, it's helpful to utilize events that happen even to all employees in the company, like COVID or like CrowdStrike, et cetera, that impact every individual. Using those to say, hey, when a COVID happens, or when a CrowdStrike, or when a Hurricane Helene, or whatever it may be happens, this is why we plan. We plan beforehand so that we do know what to do during an incident. That's part of socializing your program, sharing the value of your program when something does happen. Another part of providing a resilience-based culture is the aspect of defining your program. We talked about this initially with our BIAs, but it's also very important to consider defining what are your processes, what level are we doing those, what level are we doing our business continuity plans before we go out and actually do this level of planning. I was working with a services organization a couple of years ago, and they have about, they're a business continuity team, and they have about 400 processes currently. And as we were talking, they were asking the question, hey, we've got 400 processes. How do we know which ones are critical? And I said, that's great. That's a good spot to be at. We're trying to define what is critical. And I said, what's the definition of a critical process for you? What does your policy, maybe a business continuity or a BIA policy that your team has or your enterprise has, what does that policy say? And they said, we don't have a policy for this. We don't have a definition. And so a little bit of a situation of cart before the horse there. We can't go out to the business and have them tell us what they do and what's critical without us knowing what's critical first. And so there I suggested, hey, let's go back and really define that for your organization, because my definition of critical may be very different from yours, right? Different businesses, different methodologies. So that's a focus on building definition, building policies to make sure that they provide and lay the foundation for the different outcomes that you have. Considering your senior leaders, considering the company or the enterprise strategy, how can we align our goals to make sure that they're in line with that? Maybe we're trying to reach a certain growth perspective over the next couple of years. And you know that if a certain area of the business goes out, we're definitely not going to reach that. That's part of the story we can utilize to tell both the senior leaders who are going to be very motivated for those sorts of things, right? That there's a risk here, and we need to spend some time in that. Utilizing compliance and accountability is important, as we can utilize the policies that we have defined and those who are out of compliance to help tell the story on, hey, this is what we need to do to get back in compliance, so that we're all sharing, like we mentioned before, we're all parts of the puzzle. We're all pieces of the puzzle that, whether we have 50 or 100 or 500 different processes or plans, whatever it may be, they all work to the resilience of the company overall. Kate, before we move on to data, anything you wanted to add from the resilience-based culture there?
No, I think you covered it. Like I said, I think that one really goes hand in hand with a lot of the other problems and solutions as well.
Yeah. And I think real quick, it's important to, I know you mentioned executives and senior leader support. Maybe we find that one string that we can pull with that team, right? What's one thing that's important to them that we can tag onto and use that as a thread throughout our program. But as we look to data, both the quantity and the quality of data that we have, it's first important to acknowledge no one has perfect data. I was in person down in Dallas the other day for one of our regional user groups, and we asked the question in the room, raise your hand if you feel like we have a complete set of data for your program. And not a single hand went up, and the room was quiet. And later on in the day, we broke out into some breakout tables, and we were having conversations. Hey, let's talk with each other about what's the current state of data in your organization. And what we found out was many clients and many organizations have great data for some areas of their business, but other areas of the business, it's lacking. Maybe that's more immature, maybe there's multiple system of records. And this is an opportunity for us as practitioners to help tell the story of our business and really those gaps in the business. It's very important to identify who and where the system of records are for the data that we utilize. We see this very commonly with employees or sites, vendors, third parties, or applications, things like that, that maybe there's multiple lists of data that we have currently in the company. It's tough to integrate with multiple lists of data. And so how do we tell the story to the organization and say, hey, we need to have this consolidated? Who's the actual owner of this data, right? Prior to joining Fusion, the organization that I was with, they were working to implement a CMDB. And at that time in the organization, we were looking to bring in applications to the CMDB, and then we were looking to integrate our system at the time with that application list. And as we were going out to the business and working with the IT teams, we found out that there was at least 4 quote unquote master lists of application data. Well, how can you have 4 of those? Only one is the source system. And so as we implemented a CMDB, we were advocates to the IT team saying, hey, we only want to connect to one list. We've got to have a single list within the organization. We can't have a list in the internal intranet. We can't have a list over here in SharePoint. We can't have a list in Excel. We've got to have a list in our single list. And when there's updates to that list, know that folks in the company need to go to that source system and update it there, right? This is where the technology system, whether that be a CMDB or a planning system, is helpful to help understand the depth and breadth of what the data is and what relationships it does have. It's also important to help define the data that we are collecting. Some organizations use the term vendor, some use the term third party, some use the term supplier. Now, those terms may have a similar meaning, but they all may have a separate meaning. I had a meeting with both an airline company as well as a health insurance company recently, and they're working through mapping some of their IT infrastructure and application information. What we found was that the definition that the business continuity and disaster recovery teams had for application or service component was in fact different than the IT team's definitions. And so we had to map examples of that data so that we knew that we're going to um, make sure we're talking the same language, right? And this is often an example of, hey, let's start by doing this ourselves. Let's start by mapping the small stuff for us and then collaborating with other teams to do that. Kate, let's go ahead and move on here, unless you had any comments.
I don't think so. I guess the only anecdote I would maybe add is just from my own experience in consulting with a bunch of organizations. My favorite question to always ask was, how are you actually using that data, or what kinds of actions, what actions are you taking now that you have this information? And I think that's always a good question because it gets people to pause and really think about the purpose of what they're capturing. I think it's easy to find ourselves capturing data just to have it, but we want to make sure that it is simple and only capturing the things that we're actually going to find value in and the things that will actually drive impact across the organization.
Alrighty. Well, let's go ahead and jump to the next slide. We've got our second poll here. So if we can go ahead and pop that up, that would be great. This one is focused in on kind of that first bucket, right? The senior leadership or executive management team engagement. So this is kind of a question that asks, how confident are you that your organization's leadership values your program and its impact? I'll read that again. How confident are you that your organization's leadership values your program and its impact? So 5 answers here, from not so confident all the way through completely confident.
I'm very happy to see some of these results. We have a lot of 3s, 4s, and 5s for those people in the
Great.
1s and 2s. I hear you. I would assume that many of those 3s, 4s, and 5s were also in your place at one point.
Yeah. No, I think that's great to see a lot of folks that are quite confident, right? It's great to have executive leadership that is very confident in why we have a risk and resilience program. That also showcases the need that we still have a ways to go, right? We still have things to do, and that's a good thing because that's why we all have jobs, right? The value is sold as, hey, we still have work to do. There's still risk out there. There's still threats out there, and we're not completely immune to anything yet, right? Okay, thank you for popping into the poll there. We appreciate it.
All right. So
Wrong way again. Sorry. There we go. Apologies.
All good. So we are going to take a few minutes here, kind of close us out. As I said, we will have time for questions, but we have a couple more slides before we get there. So let's kind of take it all back to what we know. We know that there is a new and increasing focus on resilience being pushed by organizations and their executives looking for return on investment and/or improvement. This increase is really driven by continued crises such as, for example, the CrowdStrike incident we had recently, or Hurricane Helene, Milton. It's also being driven by government regulations and meaningful protection of those revenue sources, and really requires that actions are not being taken solely from the individuals, but also from the collective organization. So what does that mean, and what does that require us to do? Really, it all boils down to, in my opinion and in Kurt's opinion, these 4 things. So what that means is that we need to have a defined and embedded and cross-functional governance. We also need to have data that is owned and managed with support from and across the organization. So this means that the content of your BC planning lifecycle is really maintained and approved often, that your procedures and strategies are actionable, tested, and validated. We also want to ensure that we have strong relationships across the organization, So again, hint, business continuity is just one part of what it takes to be resilient. There are many other departments and parts of your organization that are going to be involved in that overall goal and effort. And then I think the final thing is really we want to ensure that the impact is tangible and visualized at the highest levels. And we want to show that that is drawn or because of the activities we've completed in this life cycle. Kurt, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I'll just touch on that last point just a little more. I think it's very easy for us to say, hey, I need this, I need this, I need this in our roles. Hey, we need more support from the business. Hey, we need more time to do exercises and testing. But we also have to tell the story on how it's impacting the organization in a positive light, right? We have to tell the story that, hey, because we prepared for this event, we didn't have a significant negative impact. We were still impacted, right? But it wasn't significantly. And so that's a positive thing, right? Telling that story, both the need as well as the end state.
All right, awesome. So why does this matter? Really data-driven decision-making, cross-functional collaboration, and that executive support is key to ensuring that our BC plans are effective, tested, and validated. Again, larger picture, we want to ensure that downtime is minimized, that our revenue streams are protected, and that regulatory compliance and customer confidence is maintained. Ultimately, all of that goes into then supporting the long-term sustainability and resilience of our organization.
And as we come to a close here, it's critical to consider the why that we just talked about, how this impacts the organization, like I just mentioned, in a positive light, how all of the time spent doing the analysis, the impact assessments, the planning, the tabletops and exercises. It's not just another part of the job description of our employees, but this is where we look at the organization with a glass half full mentality, right? We're here planning so that when something happens, we're ready and we're prepared. So for these four areas of challenge down there on the bottom that we kind of talk through, right, the executive buy-in through the quality and quantity of data, consider these four things above that, right? As you're going throughout your program, it's very important to consider resilience as a journey, right? Maybe for those of us and those of you that are parents, a mother or a father, you know that raising a child is a journey, right? Through graduation and ultimately having maybe grandkids, right? Risk and resilience is similar. It's a journey. This isn't something that we ever finally achieve. It's a journey on how we're addressing these impacts of existing threats in our world and the new ones that come out, right? This is a broken world we live in, and the struggles are never ending, right? So how do we best approach those? And so just a couple things that I will leave you here as you are continuing to focus in on the risk and resilience of your organization, whether you're performing BIAs, updating plans, performing tabletop exercises. Make sure you have a clear understanding with your executive team on the outcome and know what exactly is critical to your company. Make sure that the focus on the value of the program is at the core. What are we actually trying to accomplish? And that's the why. And making sure that your organization and leadership teams are confident in their planning. This is a benefit to our programs, right? Leaders feel confident that their teams know what to do when something happens, right? The fire department, I used the fire drill example a minute ago, but the fire department, they know what to do when they're called, right? And then when something does happen, your organization can have confidence that the impacts that you feel are minimized based on the level of planning, and whatever the different parts of loss are, whether that be financial, reputational, brand, operational, etc., those are minimized. So these are some of the benefits that we have by practicing these different areas that we see below. And so with this, I think we're going to go ahead and jump to the last slide here. We've got a couple of minutes for questions, so we'll open up the chat there. But as we do that, just wanted to say thank you for everyone today. Appreciate the time, the interaction in both the chat and the polls. And we'd like to open up the floor to any questions that you may have.
All right, and if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Seeing a lot of thank yous, so thank you for
Very
that.
good. Yeah.
Ooh, okay, I'm seeing a couple questions. One was around a demo, and Ramya, I can follow up with you on that. The next one I saw is, how do you define a process for business continuity? That's a good question. Kurt, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Sure. Yeah, I can start off with that one. As we talk about different processes, oftentimes I'll encourage, what are the different business units and departments in your organization? So we want to make sure that a process is not too low level that it's at a task or an activity level, but it's not too high level or strategic. So that's the vague way of saying it. But we want to say, hey, what does each individual team do? And how is that different from other things that are done in the company? So oftentimes we'll say, for a process, a business process, how are this processes impacts criticality level as well as dependencies different from other areas of the company? And so that may be one way to break out processes. Another way is to say, hey, what different areas of the business depend on your team? Is it so large, such as an insurance organization that does claims? Well, maybe that's too high level of a process. Maybe we need to break that down into different types of claims processing that those teams do. So a couple things to think about there. And really, I often encourage level of processes or defining a process. There may be a little bit of a range there. And so for some areas of the organization, it might be a little more tactical. In other areas, it might be a little bit higher level, but we don't want to have very tactical all the way through very high level because it's tough to navigate through those.
Awesome. There were a couple questions around that, so thank you for covering that.
Yeah.
Let's see here. I'm seeing one actually asked us a question, so that shows up nicely for me. It says, how can you leverage an event to get buy-in on developing a program?
I'm going to take a first pass at that one, Kate. You want me to?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think probably all of us have probably heard the phrase, never let a good crisis go to waste. And so I think one way to maybe use an event is to take a look at things that have impacted your company recently. So the example I gave about Hurricane Helene, I think as painful as that might have been or is currently for that organization and for many people impacted by it, it's a fantastic way to then drive value of what we're doing here, because it's a way to say, okay, you know, we did XYZ things to have this impact. Here was the reduction of risk we had when this hurricane hit. So maybe here are some of the impacts that our program has had on this specific event. But then also to say, okay, here's what we could do if we got more investment from, you know, our leadership or our organization. And so I think that's a great way to kind of tie it back to what's going to really matter at that upper level. Hopefully that answers that question.
Oftentimes our executives only hear the what if this happens, right? Being able to tell that story of this is what happened and this is the impact of that is significant, right? And then being able to say this is how we mitigate it. Do we have time for maybe one more question?
Yeah. Oh, I'm seeing a couple that I really want to answer. One is around DORA. DORA is quite complex. Regulations are still being finalized, but it is really all around operational resilience. I am more than happy to have any conversations around that. I think diving into it might take longer than we have here today. Another question, how to use AI in business continuity and resilience efforts. This is a favorite of mine and something that Fusion as a company has recently kind of leaned into. And so I think there's a lot of different ways we can use artificial intelligence, whether that be in something like generating scenarios and helping us with that testing and exercising effort, or maybe it's something like reviewing maybe your plans or your dependencies to make suggestions for things that might be missing. That one I could give an entire presentation on, and it's a very exciting topic for sure. I think we are at time here, though.
Yeah, maybe to close us out, I'll just mention DORA. That's an acronym. It stands for the Digital Operational Resilience Act. So that's important
Yes,
to
sorry, I should
note.
have said that.
There's quite a bit that's impacting that, specifically from the UK and the financial institutions that support that one. But no, appreciate the questions today. I'll go ahead and close this out. Thank you all for your participation, both in the chat as well as the polls. We hope that it's been a benefit to you. I know that the slides and recording are available as well. Thank you all, and hope you have a great rest of your day.